Congratulations on this album. I sat down and took a listen to it, and it is absolutely amazing. Congratulations.
Thank you so much for saying that. It is, I mean, I suppose, every band is always going to say we're excited about our new album or we're proud of our new album. But I have never felt that more than I feel with this album. It is, it's amazing that it's finally about to be released to the world, and I'm glad that you've gotten to hear it already and that it has connected with you.
I think what really connected with me with this album is it's such a deeply personal album for you guys. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the themes and some of the topics that this album touches on?
Sure. Yeah. It's sort of funny to say that it is our most personal album because it most definitely is. But we've always been a band that used our music to explore, our own past, our own experiences, and to sort of situate it, alongside, however you want to think of it, the human condition or something like that. And yet this one is so much more introspective and so much more, personal. And it really has to do with, where we were coming from, psychologically, spiritually, however you want to think about it. And also, the sort of global circumstances around writing it. We'd started to catalog ideas off and on as far back as 2019, but it wasn't until 2020 that the writing really began to take shape. And in order to get to the place where we actually started writing the album, there was a lot of work that had to get done in our lives as individuals, and then collectively as a band. We had, really sort of become disconnected from one another. We had become disconnected from the idea of what Khemmis was at its heart. And speaking for myself, I had become disconnected from myself, from, my notion of who I am as a musician, even just my notion of who I am as a human being. I found myself in the darkest place I'd ever found myself in my entire life, and only after I began my recovery process through the help of my amazing wife and my therapist and my psychiatrist and some really good medication did I find myself in a position to start to ask these questions about what Khemmis was and if we still wanted to do this. To be frank, there was a not insignificant amount of time where we didn't know if we were going to keep doing this as a band. Again, our sort of collective passion and what this band could mean to us had been replaced by what it did mean to us, and that it had become something we weren't passionate about, that didn't bring us joy.
Coming out of those feelings and heading into working on an album, was that difficult for you, or did you actually kind of find that therapeutic to actually sit down and start to put all those feelings down on paper?
That's a really good question. It goes back to being really a matter of timing. In this case, that had we tried to start writing this album when we were still figuring these things out, I think that we probably would have just called it a day and quit. But instead, we started writing after we had, reconnected, and the three of us sat down and had some pretty long talks about, what we wanted from this band and what we were trying to do with our lives. And, following up those conversations with diving into the writing process, there was a rediscovered sense of joy that I certainly felt in my own life of being able to tap into those sounds that make Khemmis Khemmis. And I can point to the moment that happened for me, and it was when I wrote what wound up being Living Pyre. We'd already gotten a few ideas here and there, and we had a general sense of what we thought the album would be. But one day, I don't know, maybe late spring, early summer, probably early summer, I sat down with a guitar, and for the first time in I don't know how long, ideas just kept coming out. My fingers went into the position that wound up being that opening riff, and it was just, I felt plugged in. And anyone that is a musician or a writer, does any kind of creative stuff, knows what that feeling is like when you get in the right headspace, you get in that flow state, and you just never want to leave, because you feel like what you're doing is what you're supposed to be doing. And for the first time in probably 3 years, I felt that when I started writing that song. And I remember getting, the end of the day, I'd been tweaking ideas on it, but I got it about, 80, 85% of the way there. And I sent it over to Zach and Phil, and they were, excited, and they suddenly felt that spark too. And Zach was coming up with drum ideas, and Phil was, sending revisions of these riffs back. And that really ignited the, writing process in a sustainable and joyful way, where from there, it just felt like we couldn't, there were days where it felt like we couldn't write fast enough, where Phil and I were bouncing ideas from multiple songs off each other back and forth. And we were having to do this remotely because we were quarantined.
Yeah.
And what that meant was, by the time we were able to get back, in a room together, it was probably the end of the summer, early fall, we had this body of work, that this sort of raw material that we knew there was some good stuff in there, but you never really know how it's going to feel until you can be in the room together and actually flesh these ideas out. You can tab them out in Guitar Pro all day, which is what we were doing. We were using that to sort of compose remotely. But it's, at the end of the day, it's about getting in a room, cranking up those amplifiers, and seeing if the feeling that you're trying to capture, trying to channel, is really coming through. And if not, what needs to change to really drive home that emotional message.
Yeah, I read in another interview as well that the band gave that you guys felt that this album was a lot freer. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you meant by that, by this album feeling a lot freer.
For the first time, we came into writing this album with the sole purpose of writing the album that, critics be damned, we wanted to hear. And we've always tried to have this ethos at the heart of writing, but the difference here was that we didn't have this sort of internal voice saying, oh, that might be a little bit too much for Khemmis, or oh, that might be a little too extreme, or oh, that might be a little too mellow. We had grown into a sense of confidence about what this band sounds like, what this band means to us, and that confidence meant that we could let these songs grow naturally without feeling that we had to intentionally rein parts in. And just trusting in one another that if someone has an idea that feels, too far outside of the sort of mission statement of Khemmis, that the others would be, critical, but also kind enough to say, that's not quite it, but how do we get this in the ballpark? But not trying to play it so neatly within the boundaries, I think. And so what that meant for us was, you listen to the opening moments of Vernal Gate once the full band kicks in. We've never done that before. Yeah. And yet that musical moment, that riff actually is the one that Zach pointed to early on and said, musically, this is the heart of this album. This is the feeling I want to sort of center this record around. And that meant embracing that riff for what it was and not trying to, what if we put a doom beat behind it, or, oh, should we make it swing? No, it's a Swedish melodic death metal riff. That's what it needs to be. And we owned it. And we felt like that throughout the album, whether it was, the intensely depressive funeral doom moments, whether it is those more Scandinavian melodic death or black metal moments, whether it's the Judas Priest riff that drives the Astral Road, and trusting that we could pull these things together in a way that still sounded like Khemmis and wouldn't sound like a million different ideas crammed together.
Yeah. Where do you think those inspirations came from? Were you listening to a lot of black or death metal at that stage, or was it something that just happened organically with the band's sound?
I think it's much more the latter. I mean, a lot of last year, I didn't listen to metal. The world was scary enough, and I spent a lot of last year listening to John Prine and Steely Dan.
Yep.
And some of my favorite music, certainly still, a lot of metal, but no more, at the gates or Dismember than I would have listened to for any other reason.
Yep.
And what's interesting is I think if you listen back through our earlier records, you hear those influences, and the difference is this time, sort of going back to that idea of confidence, not that we ever before said, oh, that's a cool At the Gates riff, but let's de-Swedish it or anything like that. But just feeling confident enough to take those influences, take those sounds, put them through the Khemmis machine, and let them grow naturally. And if that means it needs to be more aggressive, so be it.
You mentioned before that the writing process was changed a little bit because of lockdowns and quarantines and things like that. How was the recording process affected? Because I know for a lot of bands here in Australia with the long lockdowns, we're seeing a lot more albums being recorded in people's homes. How was the recording process affected for you?
The way that we have always recorded is that, we start with drums, and so Dave Otero, who produces all of our records, he and Zach will do the drums, previously at his studio. This time, we're able to do the drums at a bigger studio on the other side of town, but it's really just the two of them. Phil and I would pop in and see how things were going, but we try to give each other some sort of creative space when it comes to recording. And the same is true when it comes to guitars. Zach's not in there with us the whole time we're doing it. As we were recording guitars, it was Dave, me, and Phil. And at Dave's studio, his sort of control station is far enough away from where everyone else is that we could, be in there safely. We still wore masks a lot of the time. We still had to play it safe, but because we didn't have to all be in one room at any given time, it didn't affect our logistics for the most part. Other than, again, just being cognizant of, wearing a mask, washing your hands. It also helped that we were still largely locked down, so the only people we were seeing was each other. We didn't have to worry about, someone, getting sick from someone else, because we all literally saw each other and no one else for that entire time.
The world is opening back up now. I know we're a little bit behind the rest of the world. We've still got 3 weeks of lockdown to go, but the world is opening back up. How excited are you guys about being able to get out there and do some shows and deliver this new music live?
I mean, we are incredibly excited and incredibly grateful, because there were so many moments last year and this year where there was a real question about when, if ever, will it be reasonable and safe for touring to resume. Thought maybe the biggest of the biggest bands could pull it off. But what happens if all the DIY venues shut down? What happens if this virus is left unchecked? Like, a lot of musicians, a lot of venue staff don't have health insurance in America, which, Lord, we could have a whole conversation about that. But, it's everybody needs music and art, and it is such an integral part of the human experience. But we weren't willing to go out on the road and risk people getting each other sick or us getting sick. I mean, thankfully, we all have health insurance, but we are, lucky in that respect. And the fact that it looks increasingly likely that these dates will happen, and increasingly likely that these shows can happen in a safe manner. I mean, I'll put it this way. We played at Psycho Las Vegas a couple months ago, and it was the first time we'd been on stage in 2 years. And being on stage is my church. That is my spiritual moment, when I am up there and I see these people who feel connected with our music, feel connected with me. And having not had that in 2 years, I felt like some part of me came back to life. And I realized how essential that is, not only for me and for my brothers in Khemmis, but for all of us. We need to be reminded of the togetherness that music affords us. And we need to be reminded that there is good in this world, even if there's so much evidence to the contrary. And we need to be reminded that there's joy to be had in, loud amplifiers and powerful drums and people singing and screaming along from the crowd. The human spirit needs that art. It needs music in all its forms, and the fact that it's coming back to us is something I am incredibly grateful for.
Definitely, we're feeling that here as well. I think this is the first time ever in my life that I haven't been to a live show in 2 years, and yeah, I think that's what I've missed the most, really. I know we are running out of time very, very quickly, so I guess to finish off, what would you like to say to your fans out there before they get a chance to sit down and take a listen to this album? Because I know there are so many fans of yours here in Australia that just cannot wait for this album to come out.
I'd like to say thank you. I'd like to say thank you to everyone that's been supporting us, at every step of the way, everyone who's been there since Absolution, and to everyone who's getting on board now. We love you, and we are thankful for you, and I hope this album does something for you. And maybe it's something profound and spiritual, or maybe it just gives you a reason to bang your head and listen to loud music and shut out the rest of the world for 42 minutes. And we're glad to have you, and we can't wait to see you all on the road, especially all you Hellraisers down in Australia. I promise we're going to make it down as soon as we can.